Our first speaker tonight is Ronaldo Barbachano. You've seen him speak here before, mostly on other map integrations with Meteor. And today he's going to be telling you about Meteor-powered Google Maps. Ronaldo.
Hi, I'm Ronaldo. I'm here to tell you about Meteor-powered Gmaps. Specifically, why? That's a good question. Mainly, we avoid loading all data at the same time. I like to have a prototype with handlebars a lot, and it's also a little more secure. A lot of Gmaps stuff kind of exists as AJAX that occurs when you query an API. We can also optimize JSON feeds if we choose, and ultimately reduce data transfer. The data that I work with, I've been working with a lot recently, the Moves API, Instagram, and Strava. Main question you want to ask is, what do we make reactive? And we can make the markers, polylines, info windows, and interface elements. Moves is an open API. It's a passive tracking type of application, and it gives us data, activity polylines, which refers to where a person has traveled, places markers refers to where they have stopped and visited, and a little summary that gives us calculations of whether they've been moving via walking, cycling, or transport. And we also use Instagram. I just use the user's recent geolocation feeds, and I create place markers and a little info window for each of those. And Strava. I just got my access back to this a few weeks ago, and it's kind of geared towards running and cycling that has more of a competitive bent. With this API, I'm only using start end markers, and I'm creating a little lowerface element at the bottom. So, challenges. Initializing the map. A lot of times, initialization kind of ties up the rest of what you're doing within your application. In addition to initialization, you also have to set the map center. And doing this isn't always straightforward. If you don't set it centered, they just get a gray screen, and the user probably will become frustrated. Moving on, template load order issues are also a big concern. It's when you decide when do I want to render, when do I want to use the rendered function versus the created function. And then waiting for reactivity updates. Also, when you begin to use a lot of data, you can overload the DOM, and eventually it'll crash the browser or a mobile device. Also, OAuth handshakes are not fun and easy, but they're doable. The easy way out, why don't we just reload the map every time something changes? No. Meteor to the rescue. So we try to keep it simple. And I'm saying keeping it simple, and I'll show you this very advanced flow chart of this is the way one of my application functions, more or less. Is that big enough? As you can see, a lot goes on, and a lot of that happens here inside of the Meteor template function. But also, we're kind of dependent on this date range value. So this is the website. This is where I've been today, and this is Moves data right here. So we pass the server basically a date range, and it decides reactively what to show. And we don't have to re-render the map. So here I'm connecting Instagram for the first time, and it's reloading. Uh-oh, and it logged me out. Oh, it didn't log me out. So this is what I mean by waiting for reactivity load order. A lot of times you'll have an application, it'll pull up, but it's waiting on one collection to return data, or even like a back-end call. Okay. So inside of this flow chart, you'll see what happens in the back end is mostly controlled with the publish subscribe methods. These orange things are the collections we're calling on. So to properly display the data, I have to do some extra things with the Moves API. and also with created and destroyed functions within Gmaps. Okay. So dealing with Gmaps. Right now, word on Stack Exchange is you have to create a global array that keeps track of all of your interface elements, and you've got to iterate through this array and remove elements when they're no longer needed, and then also add to them. There's really not a whole, I'm not sure how to work around this, but versus just refreshing the entire map, which isn't very ideal. So to kind of work around this, I use constant on occasion. And also just to mention, sometimes I'll use map control. And map control is a Gmaps thing where you can take an element on the screen and then drop it into like a various space on the screen, like a lower left-hand corner, right corner, top right, and a couple other selectors. But the problem is with this is if it's a reactive data source and the data changes, it'll disappear unless you re-add it back to the map. I just mentioned that. So element arrays are just something you create. They kind of constantly go through and refer to these arrays. Each element on the screen needs its own array. For example, with the Moves API, we track activity polylines, places markers, and an activity summary. The activity summary is the info window. That has its own array, and it's referred to by its Mongo ID. Also, Places has its own array, and Activity Polylines has its own array. In addition to Instagram has its own array for its geolocation feeds and Strava. So I'll just mention some of the packages I used for Trail. These are just the basic packages, and for a good reason. Libraries, I use jQuery, jQuery UI, also Google Maps API, obviously, and Moment for date calculations. And deployment, combination of Nitrous, IO, Heroku, and Meteor. Through Nitrous, I can deploy to Heroku and to Meteor at the same time, or not necessarily the same time, and I can also use Heroku's status repositories to kind of like keep my code in check, and also if I really need to deploy to a cloud. So it looks like I have a little extra time. The challenge with the OAuth was just properly keeping track of 3 different OAuth codes without using like a Meteor router or so forth. And that mainly happens through one very complex startup. I guess I'll stop there. That's a little, or I guess I can go through this flow chart a little more. This makes a lot more sense. So the template map, the map template kind of acts as, okay, now we're going to render an object. So based on that, it refers to Gmaps here, and then it goes back into depths. Well, this date range, there's a default date range that gets set when the client logs in. So once they have that depths going, these 3 APIs may or may not return any data, but it'll at least send back a data set to the client. Once that data set is received, a template will handle this moves data, and inside that template, render and created functions, or Meteor created and destroyed, and this one rendered. We have Gmaps actually do something. The destroyed function is probably most beneficial, and this prevents us, or it allows us to not have to, remove the entire screen and then re-render everything. The destroyed function needs to exist for each element that has to be removed based on when a user slides the slider down. So now they all disappear, and then they reappear. In addition, the data in the Instagram feed also updates as well. Okay, any questions?
Which project are you using on? You said you were like both on Meteor and on Oculus, or what's the?
Nitrous? Nitrous I mainly use just to quick, the question was, what development environment am I using? And I'm using Nitrous to deploy it to Heroku, but that's mainly for convenience purposes, meaning I'm not necessarily attached to Heroku. I'm not necessarily using it for deployment currently. I'm just kind of playing around with it. And I like the way it handles its Git repositories. So within Nitrous, Nitrous already has support for Heroku, so you can easily bring in a Heroku Git repository, and then also do your deployments to Heroku from Nitrous. You can also do deployments to Meteor.com as well. And I just thought that was kind of convenient.
So is your application having some parts running on Heroku and some parts on Meteor? Or?
That would be ideal, but no, they're not. Right now I'm just running two applications, one for mobile side and one for desktop on Meteor.com. Right now I'm not receiving a whole lot of traffic. At most I might have 10 users hit at the same time, but it is pretty, frequent traffic, meaning people log in and they stay for around half an hour. So it's important that their browser doesn't crash at any point, or keep the refreshes to a minimum.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Ronaldo.
Thank you.